Hi, everybody. Thank you for being all here today. My name is Christin Winter, and I'm representing Elephant Human Relations Aid today, short ERA. And specifically, we're going to focus on the question of what makes living with elephants okay. Yeah, so let's dive right in. So ERA, as the name suggests, focuses on rebuilding the relationship between humans and wild elephants that live with them. Our mission is to empower communities to embrace human-elephant coexistence and to ensure the long-term survival of free-roaming elephants in Namibia, and eventually to ensure that living with elephants becomes okay. So ERA exists already for over 20 years, and in fact has focused most of its attention on the desert-dwelling elephants of Namibia that live in the extreme northwest of the country. As you can see here on this map, the green areas are national parks. So we are focusing on elephants that live outside of national parks. So our area of operation is here. So the left area is where the desert-dwelling elephants usually roam, and they don't tend to go into national parks too much because that very western national park, the Skeleton Coast Park, is basically, it's very dry, just dunes, and right there will be the Atlantic Ocean. But sometimes they do venture into these very extremely dry areas, which makes them very special. But we've expanded our scope to include the free-roaming elephants towards the right of the area and south of the Etosha National Park, which is the one up here. And today I'm not going to talk too much about desert elephants, but you're very welcome to ask me questions at the end of the session, because really what I'm going to talk about is human-elephant coexistence as a whole between humans and any free-roaming elephant in our project area. Yeah, so before we explore the question of what makes elephants what makes living with elephants okay, first we need to identify what makes living with elephants difficult. So of course they are very big animals and they are very destructive from a human point of view. So in our area specifically, there is a lot of conflicts with elephants around water and water infrastructure, water points. So like here on this picture, elephants are breaking pipes, they are tusking tanks, they are pushing over windmills or breaking pumps, which can be a catastrophe for people that live in a very dry area, often in very rural communities far from any towns. So access to water is not that easy. So when elephants destroy water infrastructure, it can actually be life-threatening to people, but also to the livestock that they have. Sometimes elephants smell food or water stored inside houses and break them open. Sometimes people are actually sleeping where there is water stored as well. So in the middle of the night, elephants come and rip the roof off the house, which can be absolutely traumatic. Then, of course, elephants are absolute experts in breaking fences. They're also experts in climbing over fences in a very, very gentle way, not breaking anything. But if herds come through, then they have to break fences to let the small ones pass as well. And the biggest problem here really is the game or the livestock that is kept on either side of the fence that now escapes. In our area of operation, because it is so dry, there is not as much crop raiding as in other parts of Africa, but of course there are also vegetable gardens and elephants do also break them. In some cases, there was a loss of human life due to elephants. This usually happens at night when people walk without a torch and blindly run into elephants. Elephants are then, of course, shocked and defensive, and then this can end fatally for people. And that memory really lasts, of course, for a very long time in the community and spreads fear. Equally, a loss of livestock is definitely something that we keep hearing, not as often, but definitely if it does happen, it has a lot of weight. So cattle and goats, what they do is they follow elephants around because elephants shake trees and the seed pods fall down to the ground, they push over trees, and livestock is feeding on these now readily available seed pods and fresh leaves on the ground. Sometimes it can happen that they become a little bit too comfortable with elephants and sort of try to find the last seed pod in between the legs of the elephant. And then usually actually elephants can be quite patient, but then there are moments when they are not, and that can also lead to a fatal incident in livestock. Then another very crucial problem that there is, and that makes living with elephants difficult, is a lack of knowledge about elephants and about coexistence. So where we work, what actually happened in that area of Namibia is that people were forcibly removed from their home into so-called homelands that were created by the government many years ago, a couple of decades ago. And elephants disappeared in its entirety from those regions, usually mostly because of a lack of mostly because they were overhunted, and then the rest of the population of elephants fled. So that the people that live in this area actually lived without elephants for about 30 to 40 years. So an entire generation of people grew up without elephants, not knowing what an elephant is. And also not really understanding the biology of elephants neither. So we have people that come and they still believe in a way that elephants are predators. So if we really believe that, imagine believing that there is a 6-ton predator out there. That's absolutely terrifying. So there's a huge gap of knowledge and understanding of elephants. So all of these issues really result in huge financial losses and in fear. And we know that from our own lives that when we're very fearful, we do not usually make the right choices or rational wise decisions. So often in defense of their lives, their property, people tend to do something that might put their life in actual danger. So yeah, how are the conflicts managed or have been managed, or so by the government mostly and by the local authorities? So of course, because they are so destructive, often what happens is that, elephants get shot, either as problem animals. So that means they have to be declared a problem, which means that they would have had to regularly cause destruction and have been identified as an animal that has very destructive behavior and therefore cannot be changed anymore, or they are sold as a trophy animal. Either way, sometimes a problem animal that gets declared and then also sold as a trophy animal. This creates financial benefits for the communities, but also benefits them in the form of meat. Then most recently, translocation of herds was also done nationally and internationally. So sure, most of you have heard that at the end of 2020, Namibia put 170 elephants up for sale, of which 57 were eventually sold. One herd stayed in Namibia. It now is in a reserve in Namibia. The rest is being exported to outside countries. The biggest problem with all of these management methods is really that the numbers of elephants are not clearly known. It was assumed, or is still assumed, that elephant numbers are multiplying because they appear in places where they haven't been seen for decades. And again, we believe, and we're working on it, but we believe this is mainly due to environmental conditions. We're just now at the end, or well, the drought has ended, but the drought was 8 years long. So we have seen complete shifts of home ranges of elephants into areas where we've never seen them in 20 years. So therefore, we assume that there aren't that many elephants, but that they're walking so much. That's what we see. They're walking so much. They have huge home ranges, and they're shifting according to where the rainfall is. Either way, we can clearly see a decrease in conflicts directly leads to a decrease in human-caused elephant mortalities, and vice versa. An increase in conflicts will definitely also increase human-caused elephant mortalities as well. So I'm going to introduce our pillars of coexistence because of what I just said. We absolutely believe that mitigating those conflicts is the absolute key to protecting elephants, but also supporting the communities that have to live with them. So one of our pillars is the monitoring of elephants. We supply practical solutions to the problems, and we empower communities through different projects. So under monitoring, we put a lot of focus on elephant identification. It is very important that each herd, each bull is known to us and the government and the local communities that live with them, so that we can track their movement despite the fact that they may not be collared. This really helps us to really understand the amount of elephant that live there, and also understand the herd breakdown, and see which age gaps there are. We're observing the movements over many years. Some of the points on this map are from collared elephants, so the green elephant here and the red elephant here. Those are both herds that are collared. So of course there are many more points. The rest are all direct sightings. So just for your information, the black dots and the yellow dots are desert elephant movement. So you can clearly see how they're sticking towards the west, and the other free-roaming elephants do not tend to go into the west too much. You can see that over here, I hope you see my mouse, there are a few yellow dots here. So these are these desert elephants that at the end of the drought, in the last 2 years of the drought, they moved all the way east to get enough food and water over here. And now they've moved back into the west. We've developed an early warning system with the elephants that are collared, and we're definitely expanding that in the near future because it works so well. We're using the program Earth Ranger, and through Earth Ranger we have installed implemented geofences around each village. So this is an example of the Lurkop Post village, and the geofence is with a 2-kilometer radius from the village. So if the elephant called Benny walks through here, then we get automatically alerted, the government gets alerted, but also somebody that was identified by the Conservancy gets the alert as well on the phone. So that person then goes onto the radio and informs people, just like we know on the weather app the storm is coming. They say there is an elephant around, there is a herd coming, prepare yourself. So people are not in shock. They can put all of their conflict mitigation methods in place that they now know how to do. They have a vegetable garden protected. Just this knowledge of knowing elephants are close already empowers people. Then one of our main projects, in fact, that we started with and are still going strong with is the waterborne protection program. This really is like the plaster on the wound, because it is so easy for elephants to break these infrastructures. We developed a volunteer project where volunteers come internationally to help us build these walls. It's a great financial setup. It's sustainable for us as an organization, and it works fast. This really takes the pressure off of the people immediately, and at least they can say, all right, our water source is fine. They cannot break it. Usually there is an elephant dam close by or not too far from the place, so elephants can still come and drink and leave without breaking anything. Then something that really became a very important project in recent years is our solar water pump project, which really is a financial relief. So what happens is that most villages have diesel water pumps, which of course have to pay for themselves. So often they have enough money to pump for themselves and their livestock, but struggle to find enough funding to pump for elephants as well. So now the big problem is that if elephants come and they think that they get water there, but the elephant dam is empty, they get desperate and then they start looking for water in the houses. And so we have identified 40 key villages that have a lot of conflict with elephants, many encounters with elephants that also lie very close to what we consider an elephant channel or a corridor. And there we are replacing the diesel pumps with solar water pumps. And this is not only a great financial relief, but it's also some kind of financial benefit, in fact, because they're obviously saving on diesel costs massively, especially these days. It's so expensive. That means they have enough water, the elephants have enough water, and the tolerance towards elephants actually increased. Then I have mentioned elephant drinking dams before. So here the main motivator for this project is that elephants are still walking through the village to get to water, mostly at night, because that's when they feel safe. But that's also when human mortalities happen, or can happen. The risk is really high for confrontation with elephants. So communities have applied to us to build water points for elephants outside of the village. And this works really well as well. This is still a young project, but we see that it works. Elephants come, they drink, they leave. The people often don't even know they were there. Also a new project is that we're together with the government, other NGOs, and the communities and farmers of the area, looking into identifying elephant corridors in main channels that they're using. And the hope is that we can connect these different the landscapes that they are using and protect the corridors that they are using. Because of all the environmental changes that keep happening, that are very, of course, unpredictable in the future. But in Namibia, it has always been that there were 8 to 15-year-long cycles of droughts, and elephants and other wildlife adapt to these cycles. But as humans, we do not. So the aim is to make sure that elephants can use the habitat that they choose to, that they need in terms of droughts and rainy seasons, and really make sure that they can still use the pathways that they used to do, or that they really clearly want to use. There's a whole nother topic on commercial farms that I'm not going to go into, but there is a lot of need as well to connect the pathways they use through commercial farmland, which are all fenced off. So in terms of empowerment, our peace project was started in 2009. And as I've mentioned before, the lack of knowledge really triggers so much fear and mismanagement, in fact, in terms of elephants and conflict. So our education and training project really addresses that need of knowledge. We work with school children that live in areas that regularly gets visits by elephants, and we work with elders, with community leaders, with the youth, with anybody that needs to learn about elephants, but also really importantly, how to mitigate conflicts. Like, this is the knowledge that exists, that we have collectively as people that work against elephants. Everybody should know this. So this is really what we're focusing on in our education program, to give the opportunity to people to understand what they can do themselves. We started an elephant guard project a couple of years ago, and is now going into the second phase, in which we're training community leaders to become an elephant guard. They are chosen by the community or the conservancy, and they fulfill the role of basically extending the education project, being available all the time. If there is an emergency with elephants, they are there to continuously reach out to the people to support them. And for example, if we know that there is if they get an alert of elephants coming to a village, then they can be the ones reassuring the people, perhaps if needed in the beginning phase, go to the people, support them throughout the night until there is a level of confidence that everybody can deal with this just fine. Yeah, so we in this education project, we're heavily focused on elephant behavior, how to read elephant behavior, how to not misunderstand the intention of an elephant so that oneself can react in a safe manner. How can I defend my home when an elephant comes to my place? What should I definitely not do? Some people stay completely quiet and hide under the bed, and that is often the wrong message to send to the elephant, because that basically means it's okay, you can come, or maybe they think there is nobody home. On the other hand, shouting and running and throwing rocks is also not ideal, depending on the situation, of course. So there are many things one can do to really safely defend your homestead. And of course, how to prevent conflicts in the first place, how to prevent damage to your garden, to your water point, or your house. Yeah, so what makes living with elephants okay, really? We figured it is having the water points secured as the very first thing. Like, my property is safe from elephants. It doesn't cost people anything to live with elephants anymore. People shouldn't have to pay for elephants to come and drink at their place. That is really a source of frustration, and therefore, if it doesn't cost them anything anymore, and perhaps they have a financial benefit on top of it, then that makes living with elephants so much easier. People know how to mitigate conflicts. Knowledge is power. That's just what it is. So people have to know this information that we're all having. People are warned of nearby elephants, gives people a lot of security. Many say, if we just know that they're coming, then we can prepare. And we have that technology. So now we are implementing it. And it definitely helps people to calm down and feel in charge of the situation. And people feel supported. That through a local NGO, but Elephant Guards think it's a very, very important project and a key driver in actually having people embrace the coexistence idea. I was asked to share a case study, and what I will do is I will share a story about communities standing up for their elephants. So the elephant that you see here is a desert elephant bull called Voortrekker. He was actually really quite famous internationally and nationally, because perhaps you remember the elephants were absent for a very long time in that specific area. And when they returned, it was him that was seen first. So he was called Voortrekker, in fact. which means pioneer, by the local communities, because he was seen first, and he then came and introduced the herds to the area. In 2019, he was sold as a problem animal-based trophy animal. So he was declared a problem elephant, but sold as a trophy. Now, and this is what happened. So on this map, I hope it's not too confusing, but what you see, this green area, these are conservancies. The area that is red here on the right, those are commercial farmlands, which we're not focusing on today. And the area between is state-owned land that hasn't registered yet as a conservancy. We're looking specifically at the conservancies Sorisoris and Uchimboyo. And did it work? Yeah, in the area down here, which is called Omashete. So we've been working in this area for a very long time. This is the home range, a core home range of that bull voortrekker. He moved up and down the riverbed here, in between all of these different conservancies, into the state-owned land, into commercial farmland. So basically all of these areas, all of the villages, all of the conservancies shared that elephant, as well as the whole population of desert elephants. But in the beginning, there was a misunderstanding of how many elephants were here. So they would, one village A would say, yesterday they saw 20 elephants. Today, Farm B would say they also saw 20 elephants. So tomorrow, 20 elephants were seen somewhere else. So it was assumed there must be 60 elephants in that area, roughly. The same happened in the next conservancy. So overall, people were quite convinced they must have over 100 elephants in that area, whereas it was the same herds moving. So because at that time, many years ago, there was no tourism set up in the area. So elephants had no value unless they were hunted. When we started to work in those areas, the first thing we did was protect the water points that were damaged most of the time. We conducted education courses to educate about the number of elephants in the area, how to deal with the conflicts, just like I mentioned before. So the area that actually declared voortrekker a problem, or that complained about him, was this Omashete area here. And now I'm gonna just compare what happened between the two areas. So Sorisoris Conservancy and Ochimboyo Conservancy, leaders appealed to the government and asked that their elephant may not be hunted anymore, because they understood how many few elephants they had left. By that time, 2019, over 200 water points were protected. Over 1,000 people were trained through years education project. Yeah, and elephant-based tourism had been developed already in Sorisoris. So they had a couple of lodges already that actually advertised for desert elephants specifically. There is not much other wildlife left in those areas. Uchimboyo at that time, and still not, has any tourism set up. However, they wanted to keep their elephants because they understood. Yeah. Now, the Omashete area, in contrary, is not set up as a conservancy, which means there are no benefits whatsoever from elephants. At that point, less than 30 water points were protected. The area actually rejected our education projects because they thought if they accepted us as an organization, then they accepted elephants as well, which they did not want. The area formed an anti-elephant group, which was very, very loud. And they wanted elephants to be removed. They did not want any coexistence whatsoever. The outcome was, unfortunately, that the Conservancy's appeal was denied. Voortrekker was shot indeed as a trophy, and conservancies decided to submit another letter asking for a ban of hunting all of their elephants. The decision is still pending. The conclusion, we believe, is communities are more likely to accept living with elephants if damage is prevented. Fear is decreased through education. People feel empowered to protect their property, and conservancies benefit from elephants. Even though the outcome was still negative, we think that it is still a huge step forward in elephant conservation, community-based elephant conservation. When communities stand up for their elephants and actually demanding the protection of them, then we see that as a huge success, despite the fact that nothing yet has been decided. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to hear your questions later. Thank you.
So yeah, moving from Namibia into Botswana, and through this talk, you'll no doubt see some similarities between the work that Christin was talking about and our work down in Botswana, but the context is very different. And what works in some areas don't necessarily going to work in other areas, and vice versa. So the cultural context, the elephants in the area, the economy and the environment will have an impact, we believe, on what's going to work for human-wildlife coexistence. So today I'd like to cover the following. Give you some background on the Botswana elephant story, which is in contrast to many other African range states, in that we have a growing population and a large population of elephants. I'm going to quickly summarize some of the myths surrounding male elephants, and that could be a whole other talk, but we'll quickly talk about some of those. And then summarize some of the problems, which Christin already has done, but again, it's a different context down in Botswana. And then some of the solutions that we have found work, or not we, that the communities that we work with and partner with have found to work for their situation. So the Botswana elephant story, as I mentioned, is slightly different. And this graph shows you from the African Elephant Specialist Group what has happened over time. So increasing quite rapidly to the present estimation of about 130,000 elephants in a country the size of Belgium or Texas, so quite a large country. And what we have to highlight here, we talk about Botswana's elephants, we talk about Namibia's elephants, we talk about Kenya's elephants, but of course elephants are free to roam over international borders. They certainly don't need a passport. And that's something that happens quite regularly in Botswana. It's a landlocked country down in southern Africa and surrounded by South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Angola. So yeah, probably not Botswana's elephants, but all these countries together. So hopefully you can see this map, and this is just to summarize the range and some of the recent range expansion we're seeing, or another term that's commonly sort of kicked about is recolonization of elephants, particularly within Botswana. And this is helped by, or the large elephant population has been helped by relatively low poaching levels of elephants. Sadly, recently rhino poaching levels have gone up. Normally that will follow with elephant poaching. And then this doesn't include sort of bushmeat trade and poaching for bushmeat that is quite high in Botswana, but they have relatively low poaching levels for export of animal goods. And Botswana has a relatively low elephant population. The last census brought it in at about 2.4 million people. So that again is helpful when you're conserving large conserving large wildlife populations, especially elephants. Now, there has been quite a lot of ecological changes, recent ecological changes in this region. Climate change is definitely having an effect, but also there's been a shift in the water systems up in the north. And that has affected where elephants are utilizing quite dramatically, we think. And then, as I mentioned earlier, immigration of wildlife and elephants in particular from neighboring countries. Now, this could be long-term immigration, but they're basically moving across international borders up in the north here. They can do that on a daily basis. So coming in at night and then leaving to feed in Namibia and then coming back again. But also we've seen are aware of movement coming in from Wangi in Zimbabwe down to Naipans and potentially into Makgadikgadi as well, this area here. Sorry. So this is an estimate of the range today. So you can see there's been, if I flip back, quite a large range expansion in Botswana. So the dark green represents known, the light green is possible, I think, if I remember probably, yeah. And then basically the striped is unknown, but maybe. And they've been found as far south as Gaborone, the capital. So they've been a massive range expansion of elephants in relatively recent times in Botswana. So I just want to touch on some of the male myths. So where we're based, it's predominantly male elephants, and throughout the range of the African elephant, it's mainly males that crop breed. So our work has focused and continues to focus on male elephants to really understand their ecological needs alongside their social needs, as we move forward in a human landscape, how we can use that knowledge to work towards coexistence. So there are some myths associated with male elephants. If you look at historical texts, they are considered to be loners. And at this point, I want to highlight that we have to have a data collecting methodology where we give them whether they're social or whether they're alone. And for us, we're a very visual species. And so for us, that's within a certain area. If there's another elephant, then they are not considered alone. However, as I'm sure you're all aware, elephants perceive the world very, very differently, and sound and smell are really important to them. And we know that elephants can communicate using infrasound, which can travel huge distances. So when we see this male elephant, are they actually alone, or are they communicating with another elephant? But that's just, you know, we do have this very human perspective on conservation, and we need to try and think, I believe, about how other species perceive their world and use that knowledge to utilize it to communicate to where elephants or other wildlife are welcome and where they're not. When they leave the herd, they're ready for adulthood. So young males grow up in their herd, and then at adolescence, between the ages of 10 and 20, they leave their herd and become independent. Not only do they leave their herd, but they leave their natal area. So they kind of lost a lot of knowledge about where to get food and water from. And that leads on to the next point, one of my next points, that male elephants are, once they're past their mating prime, are not important. So when they leave their herd and become independent, they still have a long way to go to adulthood, or to be a prime mating elephant. That's from the needs of the females. They're not going to necessarily want to mate with young adolescent males. And also from the male's perspective, they have a lot to learn when it comes to bulking up and becoming a dominant male. And old males are not important. So our research, as well as the research of other research groups focused on male elephants, are slowly showing the social complexities of male elephants, and actually how important old males are, particularly in young males in this protracted adolescence. So a mature adult male is considered sort of 30, 35, and a young male leaving their herd between the age of 10 and 20. So they have this really protracted adolescence that's only ever really seen in Wales. As well as elephants. Other mammals will leave their herd and will leave their family group and are soon considered adult. So old males are showing their importance, but in many management systems and conservation systems, they're moved around, translocated, and or utilized for trophy individuals. So let's come on to the crux of the talk and male elephants and mankind, and really focusing on where we're working now. So we worked for 10 years up in the Okavango Delta up here. And now we are based down here in the Makgadikgadi Pans National Park. This little triangle here represents our camp. So as I mentioned, there seems to be, or there is, for want of a better term, recolonization of African elephants through Botswana's landscape. And what we're finding down here in the Makgadikgadi Pans is a fairly unique social grouping in that the majority of elephants in that area are male. When we first started our work down there in 2012, it was all males. There was no evidence of females. And then slowly but surely, we started seeing female tracks coming down to the river at night to drink. And now we do see herds occasion, and we're utilizing camera traps to capture some data on them as well. And slowly but surely, we're getting to know them, but they are particularly skittish, the females in our area. So to date, 98% of our sightings are of male elephants. And as I mentioned briefly before, throughout their range, males are the main crop raiders. So unsurprisingly, in this area, there is a large problem with human-elephant conflict. And going back to Christin's talk earlier, she mentioned a lack of cultural knowledge about how to deal with elephants. Well, the same scenario here. We've got 1 or 2 generations of humans living alongside this protected area that haven't had to deal with elephants. And so that lack of cultural knowledge has a massive impact on uptake of mitigation techniques that they may know about or may not know about, and how they interpret or don't interpret elephant behavior. So the communities I mentioned, there's an estimated 20,000 people bordering the park, and 70% of them are engaged with crop growing. So vast majority of humans in this landscape require crops to feed their family, to sell for school fees, etc. And in this area, there's the highest reported human-wildlife conflict. And I say reported because there is a compensation scheme, but many people choose not to report. But that's the data that we have available to us. And as I mentioned, there's a lack of cultural knowledge in many of these communities about what to do if you see an elephant. So zooming in, which I have on this map here, this shows the village of Kumacha, one of the partner villages that we work with. This is the Pateti River. And this, on the other side, is the Makgadikgadi Pans National Park. So it's a hard border between a national park and the community lands. And that border is a river. Now, until relatively recently, that river was dry and had been dry for 18, 19 years. When it came down, it not only destroyed the wildlife fence, which sort of zigzagged between it, allowing access to water points for the national park and the animals within that, and the community on the other side and their livestock. That was destroyed when the river came down. And obviously it's an incredibly important resource for people and wildlife in this landscape. And so that intensified the problem. We also think the Pateti River may be an important social resource for the males of this area, bringing them together. It's obviously an important physical resource when it comes to water for drinking and for bathing, but they're not coming down and leaving that quickly. Some of them do, they'll come down, have a drink, have a bathe, and off they go with their day. But we've had elephants down there 5 to 6 hours, not feeding, there's not a huge amount of food around there, and spending time socializing seemingly with the other males in the area. So we think it's an important social resource, and that's an element of our work, is looking at that specifically. So what we see in our area can be, particularly by the river, large groups of male elephants. We think that they may be selecting who to hang out with next. So they come down in groups. They don't necessarily leave in those same groups. So there's a mingling of the groups. And potentially they're following males, potentially older males, out of the park into community lands. And potentially learning crop raiding from those other males. So crop raiding. As I've mentioned, I'm going to reiterate, male elephants are the main crop culprits when it comes to crop raiding. There is other conflict with elephants in Botswana, and that's on commercial ranch land. And they're the main culprits, or the main elephants of concern by the ranch owners, is actually the females. So here is a lovely picture showing an elephant safely navigating a low fence. And these low fences are often used in cattle areas. When a female comes through, she often has, or more often than not, they have young with them, and therefore they flatten these low-lying fences, these cattle fences, allowing the herd through, other wildlife. And what's particularly of concern is buffalo in Botswana and the keeping a buffalo free zone for export of meat. So in those areas, females are actually of the main concern, female elephants. I've spoken to many ranchers and they don't actually mind the males coming in and utilising. They don't see that as a competition for resources. When there, excuse me, when there is crop raiding, the incidents generally involve small group sizes, and the adults, potentially that the adult males are leading. So this is based on founding work by one of our PhD students, James Stevens, and he found that there was small groups and that there was generally always an adult male present. And we're still finding that data. We're now monitoring crop raiding. We have done for the past 2 years, it's our 3rd year, and we're finding the same, that it's generally small groups and that there's generally always an adult male present. And we can tell that through spoor. So we hire a professional tracker to help us with this data collection. So building on this work, we're slowly but surely building an understanding of elephants in this area and how they're utilising community lands. So obviously elephants going in and eating crops has a huge social economic impact on the farmers in our area and therefore the community as a whole. But whilst damage is significant, the fence damage also allows livestock and other wildlife into the field and therefore increasing crop loss. There is a compensation scheme, but it tends to be quite slow, as in you make a claim and it can take a long time for the farmer to get the monetary value of the crops that have been damaged. There was low mitigation use within the area when this started becoming a problem. And in Botswana, they have relatively large fields which tend to be separate from their homestead. So any mitigation in those areas is very high intensity when it comes to time that the farmers have to invest, and how best do we mitigate and protect those fields. But I also want to highlight that it's not just the social economic costs of living alongside wildlife that are of concern. This is often, if you look at scientific papers, it's often what we focus on, and of course it's incredibly important. But there are other costs of living alongside wildlife, such as being able to fetch water, such as being able to attend school, and also based on our master's student, the welfare concerns of living alongside wildlife can be quite significant. And elephants, this was obviously focused on elephants. So for example, 64% of participants feel this inhibits access to drinking water, 68% of felt resources such as firewood, enabling their cattle to feed. So there has a real other impacts, including the social network of that community. So when it's dark, many community members, that's it. They stay inside where they feel safe. There's very little sort of social activity after it gets dark. So what are the solutions? Now, we're not in this alone. There's many people out there trying to find these solutions about how can we, is it possible for communities to live alongside wildlife and elephants in particular? So yes, the farmers are pivotal to this, but their other community members are also really pivotal. That's a terrible word for me to try and say, in building a landscape where humans and wildlife can coexist. So we believe, again, harking back to Christin's, there's very many similarities in engagement with the rural communities. We see ourselves as a resource of information, and we're learning from the partner communities as much as we hope they're learning from us about some of the possible solutions that can work. So empowering communities with knowledge, access to knowledge, how do you interpret elephant behavior? What do you do if you see an elephant when you're walking to your field or walking to school? And we do this through living with workshops. with our community officers that are based within the communities themselves, and have a school environmental program. So Botswana has an environmental education program in each of its primary schools, which is fantastic. And we just give access to more information to these clubs in 4 schools that we now partner with. And we use the cycle of inquiry. So it's very simple scientific theory. So what is the questions I'm trying to answer? How could I get the data to answer that? And how do I interpret that data? And we hope that by doing that, we're creating the problem solvers of the future for all these communities. And our other workshop, our main workshops, there's many other workshops we do with developing alternative income, as well as looking to minimize the use of felt resources such as firewood. But the key one is living with elephants. So that interpretation of elephant behavior, how to stay safe around elephants, and also taking our research on what we're finding and including that in the workshop. So when is it the best time to collect water, for example? What mitigation is working, etc. You know, what elephants are around at certain times of the day. Musk males are much more, potentially more dangerous. Is there a peak time when there's more musk males around? All that information we integrate into these workshops. So when it comes to the farmers, they've trialed lots of things. Initially, that was chili fences, but they really didn't work very well in that, as I mentioned, there's very large fields. So maintaining a chili fence around it. So that's traditionally a rag soaked in some oil and chili. And also when they're harvesting, there's often still rain around. And so when the rain comes, that's all diluted. So the farmers are having to maintain it. So it's quite costly from the farmer's time. And they really didn't feel it was working very well. So from that, the farmers have tried chili bricks, and that is crushed dried chili, mainly imported from Zimbabwe, but slowly but surely we're increasing local production by facilitating local chili blocks, the farmers to have chili plots and grow it themselves. And the crushed chili is mixed with dung. Elephant dung works well, and there's plenty of that around, and that's dried and then smoked. As you can see, this is Mankind, a community officer for Kumaga, and he's showing how it works. So this smoke, the chilies are incredibly hot, and the smoke produced, really, the elephants don't like it. It gets into their sensitive eyes and their nose, and that is communicating to them that they are not welcome. And that's what we're trying to create, is a way of communicating to elephants where they are not welcome. Other things that they've tried are solar lights. So these are random lights that flicker on and off. But the elephants were really quick to learn that there was no human behind these lights, and so they really haven't worked well. However, some of the fields are on floodplains, and there the farmers continue to use them because they found that it works well against hippos. And another thing which seems really counterintuitive is staying within their fields, which seems, potentially quite dangerous. But as I mentioned, the fields in Botswana are often quite far from their homestead. So they have to travel to the field during the day and maintain and weed and whatever else they need to do. And then they often used to leave. And what they found is if they stay around to maintain the chili burning bricks and to maintain a presence within the field, then they're much more successful in mitigating against human elephants coming in and crop raiding. And so to facilitate this and to enable them to do that in a slightly safer way is giving them access to tents, which we encourage to be within a kraal within the field, so that they're there, they can maintain the chili burning, and if they do hear elephants, they can come and utilize other means of communicating, such as banging of pans, which again works quite well in this area. So building on that, we really want to understand or get a better understanding. We know that they're crop raiding. What we don't know is if they're repeat offenders, and we don't know if they're simply leaving the park to go and get the crops and come back, or they're leaving the park to travel to another area. So what we've done is transects around the national park to understand entry and exit hotspots. And every time we get a call from a farmer, TT here, our research officer, and the tracker, professional tracker who we hire for the crop raiding season, go in and talk to the farmer and track where the elephant has come in and where it's left. So what we do know about the elephants in the area, and this is from a master's student, Gus Pitfield, is that they are on average in our study area for 47 days, and then they are utilising other areas. So it's a very transient population. They're not staying within the national park, they're moving in and around the national park and obviously moving into community lands. So as I mentioned, we really want to get a better understanding of how elephants are using community lands. So some initial findings of what we found is these are the hotspots. This is the river, which we saw earlier in the earlier map. And these are the hotspots we've identified where elephants have been entering and leaving the national park on a regular basis. And these tracks represent the crop raiding activities in those areas. So you can see that where there's hotspots is where they're going in seemingly and doing their crop raiding activities. Now, the wildlife fence, as I mentioned earlier, was pretty much destroyed because it was zigzagging across what was then a dry riverbed. And then when the river came down, unsurprisingly, most of the fence was destroyed. It has just been re-erected, and to date, it's doing an effective job of keeping elephants where they are, and a lot of elephants are already outside the national park. So what we don't know is whether that fence is actually exacerbating the problem. So we're continuing with our monitoring of the crop raiding, and also we're continuing with our transects around the national park to understand how elephants are shifting their movement. South of Kamacha, the fence is not finished, so we're seeing lots of activity around that area, and so that may mean that we're seeing more crop raiding activity in Kamacha. Crop raiding season is continuing. It's sort of dappering off at the moment, so we don't have that data from this year, but it'd be interesting to see the effect of re-erecting the fence in our area. But there are fences in another way that can be used, and these are electric solar fences around farmers' fields, and there have been cooperatives. So this is a traditional fence in our area, one of our farmers that we work with. And this basically spiky plants, I want to say acacia, but I know the Australians have stole that from us, so I can't remember the new name, for the very spiky trees in our area, camel thorn, for example. And that's the traditional fence, which is low level of a success when keeping wildlife out. Now, this is solar fence, and some community farmers have come together as a cooperative to produce cluster farms, which is working really well in other areas whereby fields come together and a fence is put around. And so you're making it easier for elephants to navigate community lands. So if they are traveling through, they can do without going through fields and crop raiding. What we strongly encourage is that obviously that this is maintained and that they use mitigation, other mitigation alongside it. So continue to use the chili bricks to communicate to elephants, because as we know, elephants are quick to learn how to short an electric fence. So the farmers must maintain other mitigation as well. But by having a cluster fence and having a cooperative, that means farmers can take a break. They don't have to stay in their field every night during the harvesting period and pre-harvesting period, that they could, should they wish to, rotate and therefore get some respite. We had one farmer who was raided, I think 3 times in one season, and those 3 times was when she wasn't able to stay. There was a family funeral, her children needed her, and something else happened within the community where she couldn't stay in the field. And those 3 times she wasn't in the field was when she was raided. So looking long term, what are the solutions in this area? As I mentioned, climate change, global warming is having an effect, quite a big effect in the Sadak region. And that means there's likely to be more ecological shifts, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, and changes. So we have all these lovely protected areas, particularly in Botswana, but ecosystems change. And if we aren't able to adapt and allow wildlife to adapt, then they will change to a point where wildlife or certain species of wildlife won't be able to continue living in those areas. And then where do they go? Well, they're moving into community lands and human landscapes. So Botswana has a green vision, a green spatial, where they want to join all their protected areas by wildlife corridors. Botswana's spatial plan, it's called. And this really could enable long-term wildlife populations within this system. And what we hope is that our data of this entry-exit spots and how elephants are utilising community lands, and we just received some funding to also collar within our area, to enable or give that data and our findings to the local and national stakeholders to implement where best these potential proposed wildlife corridors can be, to enable freer movement, to decrease conflict in these areas, and to really look at conservation 100, 150, 200 years in the future. It's really important, the sustainability of rural communities as well, and that's why it's so important that they're on board with any conservation initiatives and have access, importantly, to information about what wildlife is doing in their areas and what mitigation tools work, etc., etc. And as I mentioned, the challenges of climate change, we've got a snapshot of our time. What's going to happen 100 years, 200 years down the line, sustainability of both wildlife and communities are going to be challenged. So how best do we address those challenges? So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to any questions that you may have.
Kate, Christin, thank you very much indeed. It has been two very good presentations. We do have a question here from Peter Kibobi.
My name is Peter Kibobi from Nature Kenya, Nairobi, that is. So my question is, that's to Christin's presentation. So in her research work, has she incorporated indigenous knowledge in, as in like ways on dealing with elephants' coexistence, like as an adaptive as in like measures towards dealing with these problematic animals? Thanks.
Hi, Peter. I love the question. Thank you so much for asking this. And so my answer would probably be a bit longer than you might expect. So yes, we did. We did try. We had a student actually that collected a lot of information on indigenous knowledge, on everything about elephants, really, not specifically about conflicts, but elephants in general. And yeah, we found out some beautiful beliefs, some really funny ones as well. Most of them are very positive around elephants. And so the outcome of that research we share with our community members that we're doing the education program with. And it always sparks great discussions. But the main issue is, just like Kate also mentioned in her presentation, is that the cultural understanding or knowledge of elephants doesn't live anymore. It's not alive. And so the outcome of that research was really what elders remembered their parents telling them, kind of thing, but it wasn't practiced understanding of elephants or belief system that was still very much enacted. So it is a very nice conversation to have with the people. It really has value. I wish there was more value to it at this point, but perhaps it will grow in the future. But because we are also we're dealing with very many different tribes and ethnic groups across Namibia, and in fact we had done a couple of projects in the very north, which is actually not our project area, but we were asked to go there and do education courses there too. And there, the people have always lived with elephants. There was no gap. The elephants were always there. It's just there, right at the Kaza area, just south of Angola. The elephants have always been there, and so there was not that gap elephants being absent, like in our area where 20-30 years elephants were just not there, and people grow up without them and the knowledge just goes out of the window. And in the north there was very much still a depth of knowledge of elephants, cultural knowledge that definitely helped a lot to install sort of modern coexistence methods, because often they would then discover that modern knowledge, I will call it, existed in fact in some way or another within the cultural knowledge system already. So that helped a lot. But where we are, that doesn't really have as much value, because it's such a long time ago. And unfortunately, that knowledge is basically lost, which is really painful to see. But it's the truth. Yeah. So I hope it was a long answer. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's good on my side. Thanks.
All right.
I wonder, Kate, if you would like to add into that, or you feel like Christin covered all aspects there?
Yes, in some respects, I think she has. And I think it's representative of many communities where they haven't had to live alongside, let's focus on elephants or other wildlife. And then, you know, suddenly they're there, and in our case, in big numbers, and in our case, males. So it's really, our role is to speed up that cultural knowledge again through access that we have to information and the research that we can do to facilitate that learning. I think it can be really important as well to use that. So there's a wonderful author in Botswana called Bonnie, and I forget her surname sadly, but she's taken many traditional stories and is printing them and giving them access to communities. There's many tribes within Botswana, and they have different stories about elephants, and each tribe has a totem, and that works really well as local conservation actually. So if you have a totem animal, you can't, my understanding of it, you definitely can't eat it, but you can't even walk in its footprints. You can't touch its dung, its spoor, anything like that. And so by having totem animals, there's actually local conservation actively through this. So I think that's interesting from my perspective. Obviously, I'm European, I'm always going to be European, and I don't have that cultural knowledge. And what we do have within our team is many Botswana citizens. So actually most of the team, all of the team on the ground currently is Botswana. But even those, they come from different areas. Many of them come from urban areas and are still very much learning about the culture in the area that we work. So as I said in our talk, it's really a two-way communication. We're learning so much from them, and hopefully they're learning from us in not only solving the problems now, but I really think it's important that we need to be looking into the future where I'm not going to be alive, where my children and my grandchildren are going to be alive, but beyond that, the landscape that we won't know, but we're definitely impacting now. How do we ensure that humans and elephants in our context of Botswana will still be around?
Thank you, Kate. That's very good. Now, before Mickey, I move on to you. I just want to note that Dominic Mukulu, I've been watching you taking many notes. I'm hoping you're going to put your hand up with a question very soon. But before that, Mickey Mamuya, do you want to unmute and ask your question? I see you have your hand there.
Thank you, Holly. And thanks to Christine and Kate for the excellent presentation in your work. Just have a simple question, maybe for Christine. What defines a desert elephant?
Yeah, sure. So desert elephants are in fact not a subspecies. So they are the usual savanna elephant that you have in Kenya as well. But what makes them so special is their knowledge of how to adapt to living in a desert environment. Perhaps you saw or you remember on the map, the desert elephants really do seem to stick to the west, to the dry to the dry parts of the country, whereas the other sort of free roaming elephants, same species, but they don't tend to go into the west, into the desert. So they just know where to go to get food and water when things get really dry. They have been observed to spend a couple of days without water. In fact, they don't really have to do that anymore these days because there are so many villages with water points. So in fact, that part of adaptation perhaps is not as needed right now. But yeah, there are some physical adaptations as well, and some myths as well. So there are some myths saying that they have longer legs, for example, or are taller, but that's not true. That is just, it appears to be that way because they are just a lot thinner, in fact. Just because they don't have as much food available as, say, other savanna elephants from elsewhere. So really, that is also why they are considered quite endangered as well, because their numbers are really low. And it is that knowledge that these older elephants still carry of how to survive in the desert. And if that is lost, it's just like the indigenous knowledge that we just talked about. As soon as that knowledge is gone, it's very difficult to keep it alive.
Thank you. Thank you. Mickey, does that answer your question, or you have another addition onto that now?
Yeah, I'm satisfied. Thank you, Christin.
Okay.
Great. Now I have a rather more tricky question that's come to me privately. And the question is, I need to reword it a little bit, but you know, this kind of research that you're involved in, what we do see is sort of Europeans or Westerners coming to do masters or PhDs or all of these things, and you come into a community or into an area, let us say, and that's shared with a community to research, like Kate, you were saying, who's doing the crop braiding, why are they doing it, when are they doing it, and Christin, to see, you know, this difference between desert elephants and not. How do you work with the community in creating for them, you know, you talk about local knowledge and how it's accrued and traditional knowledge being lost, but this is all very new knowledge that it's like, why are you suddenly researching elephants and trying to figure out where they go, who they are, and why they go there? Surely, you know, the humans are more important. So how do you balance these conversations with communities about your research particularly, and what your end goal of your research is?
I'll take that one first, I guess. No, I think that's a big problem, you know, and it's a big problem, I think, that's slowly being solved. You know, I'm not hiding the fact that I'm European and therefore I'm an immigrant in Botswana, and I always have been. What's been amazing is that I've always felt very welcome and that I can contribute to the research priorities. But I also feel that my role and the role of Elephants for Africa is capacity building, not only in the communities, but in developing scientists, fellow scientists within Botswana, so that they have the network opportunities, the funding opportunities, and the learning opportunities to do the research themselves. And that has really increased significantly in recent times, in my opinion. As I mentioned, all our staff on the ground are Botswana citizens currently. But however, having said that, we think it's important to have international students and local students so that that network and exchange of ideas can occur. Why research elephants? From my personal perspective, I've always just been really interested in them. And it took me a long time. I called myself a conservationist, but I was really focusing on elephants and trying to understand male elephant ecology and social requirements. And then I realized that that's not actually being a very good conservationist. To be a good conservationist, you need to engage with communities and people understand how they interact with wildlife. So yeah, there was a shift when we relocated down to Makgadikgadi in 2012. We were based up in Botswana, the Okavango Delta for 10 years, where it's very much looking at male elephant ecology. So I think it's a combination. I think it's sharing your knowledge and enabling others to learn from you, whether that's in the communities or within the institutions and researchers within the countries that you work in. Now, I feel very privileged to have that opportunity personally, and that privilege comes with me trying to share my knowledge and enable others to do the same.
Okay, Christin.
Yeah, it's a very important topic, and it is very difficult to generalize this as well, I think. So I think from my point of view, from my personal point of view, I at some point just thought, so I just fell in love with elephants and with the people as well. So both sides, and the conflict that existed when I arrived in the country really just touched me so much. So I think at that point I was it's 10 years ago, I was 20. And I just wanted to, I guess, jump in and see if I can help. And I also was quite convinced that if you somehow learn about elephants, and perhaps you might find them interesting enough to appreciate them, and perhaps then you might be open to change. That was my initial thought process. And so with us at ERA, we are now 17 people. 3 of us are internationals and 14 are Namibians. And that is a very, very important trend. And the aim, of course, in effect, in the end of the day, is that the organization doesn't need to be there anymore. So which obviously then means that the problem and the solution is owned by Namibians. And that is what we're working towards. It's just that it doesn't happen overnight. And ERA was started 20 years ago. So things were also a bit different back then. And as an organization, you just go through so many changes. And now we're really at a point where I think say the internationals become facilitators at this point. Like Kate said, sourcing funding, creating international connections, creating like a sustainable financial concept to fund the projects, but with the aim to have communities really own the solution and the problem. And for us, it's always been people first. So elephant conservation, of course, that is at the core, but it doesn't happen without communities. And if you look at how communities are suffering from elephants, us as humans, no matter where you're from, you want to help the people. That's what it's all about. So yeah, eventually, I think we all have, if we are lucky enough to find our passion and our place where we want to pursue our purpose, then I think that is beautiful. And I hope that I can facilitate Namibians somehow to take over the roles that we're facilitating here. But yeah, it is a very challenging topic. But I think that we all have a role to play in this, and it is, even though it's a local problem, it's also an international problem as well. Just like as an Earth citizen, I'm very interested in elephant conservation, and I think that as internationals, we also have the right to do that.
Very, very nicely put, both of you. And Cheryl, I do see your hand is up. I'm going to nip in with 2 questions in there before you, simply because the first is from Anne Wambui, who asked to both of you, apart from Earth Ranger, what other conservation technologies are you actually using to help in human-elephant coexistence, or are technologies the other side of a coin where it's knowledge and behaviors that are more important?
Yes, I think Earth Ranger is really key in certain areas where there's potentially problem elephants. I hate using that word, but repeat offenders. I mean, it all sounds terrible. I think collar data is one key area which really helps us understand. That's what we're hoping with the funding we've just received, is to really understand how they are utilizing community land. So how are they moving through, which is the thought with this range expansion in our area, or are they repeat offenders? Are they, in some areas, they go in during the day, they kind of hide out in protected areas and then scoot across to crop raid during the night and come back. So, that really helps us put effective mitigation in place. So are we able to identify individuals that are key crop raiders? And do we then make the decision to collar them and use technology that Christin mentioned, where you could have this barrier coming up? I think there are lots of technologies. That the problem with a lot of them is that they're expensive. And what we want on the ground is mitigation that is community-led. So they're not reliant on outside funding all the time, and they're not reliant on outside help all the time, that they can come up with the solutions ideally themselves, and that they're affordable. So what you saw in our presentation, there are mobulas, the Zambian name for stoves. That was evolution. So we just had the chili bricks and we're burning them, the farmers, but when it rained, obviously extinguished them. So then they came up with this idea from learning from Zambia, and they're now locally made and relatively cheap. Again, with the chilies, we're trying to enable them to grow it locally. So it's really, one thing that works really well in areas of Kenya is beehive fences. Again, that is relatively cheap to establish, but also it creates a cash crop. So it's affording itself, but also has the opportunity and availability to make money. So yes, there's all this amazing technology available, but when it comes to mitigation, it has to be affordable. So yeah, that's the key thing, I think. I think that answers the question. I tend to go off on a tangent.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Christin, is there any other technologies that you are using? And can I add on to that? As a student, because a lot of the people in this room are students, if they were to need to get some intensive training that would better enable them for the job market, do you feel that Earth Ranger would be a program that they should be well versed with in order to apply for jobs in conservation?
I wouldn't necessarily say so, because it really depends on if the organization is making use of that program, because there are a couple of other ones that do similar things. I'm just thinking of SMART, for example. So yeah, really, where are you going to go? And perhaps the good thing is that Earth Ranger is offering free training once you are on the program, using the program. So you can't really use the program if there are no assets that you track, so be it vehicles or animals or your patrol team on foot. So once you are set up, then they are offering free training, several free trainings, and honestly their service is unbelievable. It's so good. We are so supported by this organization, and yeah, the beauty of it is that it's free of charge for conservation organizations, which is fantastic. So the value that we're getting out of the program and the people behind the program is just amazing. The gift. It's incredible. I don't have much to add to what Kate said, apart from that what we're using heavily is radio, the local radio. So especially those elephant guards, they are actually teaching over the radio. They're giving small lessons over the radio. If elephants are around, they're giving warnings and just a bit of a heads up. This is what you should do, X, Y, Z. And that's all completely community owned and led. So which is beautiful. This is really very encouraging.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got quite a few questions. We've got at least 5 in the lineup. Cheryl, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, thanks, Holly. Thanks. I've actually got two questions, but first of all, I'd like to thank both Kate and Christin. Thank you. You just reiterated all the stuff I've been doing for the last 30-something years, where education has become very crucial and knowledge is power. I'd just like to find out, I know you showed a lot of pictures of working with school children or the youth, and have you done any research pertaining to, has it worked from when they were small to where they are now as adults? Is there some big change where they're actually more comfortable in actually teaching others? Are they communicating what they've been taught at school and taking that home? Because sometimes children are the best people to actually approach to get the messages across, because early childhood development shows that it can be done. There is a lot of proof there. But then I have got another question also. It's just a very short one after that. But I know I've used art. I don't know whether you've made use of art for children or whether, whatever. Yeah, I don't know who's an answer, Kate or Christin. I don't know. But thank you, yes.
If it's okay, I'll go ahead. So not research really, but I have a story to tell that I think might answer your question. And yeah, so we've been working with a local school for 15 years. And so there is one particular boy that went, now man, but boy that went to school there. And every year Ira did in fact outreach work and renovation work as well, because the school was in a very, very sorry state. So the students and the teachers basically grew up sort of connecting elephants with improvements at the school, which is I think a very great benefit of elephants in that area. And therefore that boy grew up to become a man who was absolutely obsessed with elephants. And he then applied and became a game guard at the local conservancy. And after that became a guide at the local lodge as well, sharing his knowledge. He loved sharing his knowledge with his community when he was a community game guard, and of course then as well when he was a guide at the lodge. So this is just a story of one case. We haven't tracked the people, but we do come across men and women that now grew up and would recognize the people that have been with Ira forever and talk very warmly to us, you know. And that's my story that I have to share with this.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Kate, if you...
Yes, I can add to that. So we have questionnaires before and at the end of each year to see what information's been taken on board. But we've only officially sort of been doing it long term for 4 years, and we focus on 4 years of my memory, not long enough for them to be grown up. So we've really focusing on the primary schools, because each village has a primary school. And then this year, it should have been last year, but with COVID that didn't happen, we started in the junior secondary school as well. So each primary school feeds into the junior secondary school, which is in one of the villages we partner with. So by focusing on the primary school, we're able to access each of the 4 communities that we work with. And what we have seen, and what all the teachers and head teachers have said, is that the pass rate has increased since we've been involved in the school. Now, we don't have access to each child in that school. We partner with the environmental club, but that information and access to information that we provide is going throughout the school. So that, for me, is like brilliant, amazing. Now, we have no proof that it's attributed to us, but all the teachers are happy to do that. So I'm happy to take that. And what we found through COVID, we weren't able to go in, but we we felt that we could provide other means of getting information. So we made a lot of posters, and they are now being, and part of lots of our lessons are now incorporated into the main syllabus of the school as well. So we're really chuffed with that. But long term, we hope to see the impact. Now that we're with the junior secondary school, we can carry on that education. And then one example similar to Christin's actually is that we did a cycle of inquiry training program for teachers. So that was way back in 2012, and that was based in one of the villages, Moremato, and one of the attendees is now a guide at the local lodge there, and says that by attending that workshop, he was able to then fulfill his dream of becoming a guide and go on and contribute to the community in that way. So he's still very much an active member of the community. So there's still lots to be done. And then this year we're welcoming a student who's going to do her master's on using dance as a means of communicating conservation. So I'm very excited about that. Dance is very important in many cultures. She's from Portugal and she's used it there in ballet. She's a ballerina by training. And when she comes over, she'll not use ballet, but whatever dance the youngsters want to use, and see how effective that is in communicating outside of the school to community members.
Oh, thank you. Because I've actually did my PhD on the before and after questionnaire, as well as I did the art as well. And it is very effective in finding out the success rate of getting the message across. That I did it with grade 3s, 7s and 8s. And it does work. It really does work. Our messages are getting out there, but it does take a long time. And I'm just asking both of you never to give up. You just keep pushing forward. It's a lifetime commitment in educating people pertaining to wildlife, and especially getting them to understand the coexistence and living together and getting that knowledge out there. Then the second question is very quick. Sorry, Holly, is to ask about bees. I asked it in the last one as well, and I saw you mentioned a few things about the chilies and the dung and the crushing of chilies as well there. Do bees work? Because Tembe Elephant Park implemented bees along their fence line to prevent ellies from coming in from Mozambique, and also the elephants from Tembe going across to Mozambique. So does it work, or do they just get used to it like the chilies?
It does work. It's been very, very effective in Kenya. So Lucy King of Save the Elephants did lots of research and is implementing it now, not only in Africa, but also in Asia. But what we tried it in Botswana, she came down and did a workshop. In our area, it's simply too dry to maintain the bees. So you need them to maintain those hives. And again, it's traditionally not there to keep bees. Not that the farmers and the community members weren't willing to give it a go, they definitely were. But maintaining those hives proved impossible, sadly. You could provide sugar water, but again, that's an expense. So where we are, it's very, very dry. There's simply not the wildflowers to maintain those hives long term. And to be honest, I don't see that many bees in our area. In Kenya, it's very, very successful. And I think it's being very successful in areas such as Sri Lanka as well now. So yes, it does work. And the reason it does work is because elephants are frightened of bees. They hurt if they're going to sting. And it works because it's a hive on a wire, and they tend to have a pretend hive and then another hive, and then the elephants will push that wire that agitates the bees, they come out. So Lucy's work looked at how they react to sound. So she had playback experiments with bee sound, and therefore that led her to the idea of using them in beehive fences. And yeah, it works really well. The farmers and whoever need to maintain those hives, though, make sure they're disease-free, and also where needed to feed them with sugar water, I think is what they use.
It's also a very good, it's nutrition. So especially I deal with a lot of orphans, and I think you've got that out in your area as well. And it's a food source and it never goes off. So just, as you say, it's a matter of maintaining those hives. I've had a few hiccups with them, definitely. I mean, especially with the temperatures rising about 48, 49 degrees. And of course, children they fiddle and they don't do what they should do. And yes, we had a few stings, and we had a spa closed because all the bees went into the spa. So yeah, we've had a few hiccups, but it does work. And well, from my point of view, it does, but it is an expense.
Cool, I'm
Thanks,
going
Holly.
to move on because we've got 10 minutes before the end and we've still got a few questions. So I just want to answer Merin Taito, your question in the question box. I'm just going to answer it quickly myself because I think that your internet was unstable and you logged out. So what the people are using is they're using crushed chilies in a can, an aerated can with elephant dung that they set on fire. And the smoke then is a very chilly smoke, and it comes out of the can, and you put it upwind, and hopefully that smoke is blowing across your crop boundary with the wild areas. And then the elephant don't want to come in because their eyes and their trunk and their sensitive areas are agitated by that chilly smoke. So that hopefully will answer Merin's question, which then brings me, and Peter Kibobi, I can see your hand, just 1 second. Onto Vivian's question, because she again asked about methodologies such as chilies, such as beehive fences, such as all of these things. Can they be effective in mitigating conflicts outside of protected areas and not necessarily with elephants? So I think there's probably quite a fast answer to that. Kate, if you want to start with that one, and then Christin come in.
In short, yes. So where we work is officially outside of protected areas, and it works for elephants. And I think that's important. There is, and going back to the previous question, chilies work in our areas. They're not necessarily going to work outside of our area. So you have to trial and error. Again, what the animal's going to react to, but also what the communities are willing to try. And then when it comes to different species, it's really about understanding how they, in my opinion, perceive their world and what they don't like. So a good boma can keep lion outside of cattle, for example, but that has to be maintained. There's always an element of investment from whoever. So it's about understanding the animal, and that's why we take this view of really trying to understand the needs of the wildlife, male elephants in our area, to then take that information and go, okay, well, how can we use that to help the communities mitigate and let the communities understand their wildlife? So it's about understanding which species are a problem and how we could be communicating with them to let them know that they're not welcome there.
Oh, it's very similar here. We're obviously working also only outside of protected land, and we're using the walls as the main mitigation method to protect border points. We're also using chili fences, chili oil, and the chili smoke, which really helps in places where people have started to plant vegetables, because yeah, well, that's a new sort of way. People haven't gardened very much in the area because it is so dry. But when they lost a lot of livestock because of the drought, and they still had access to water, they started to plant. The elephants then moved back after the rains and now found all those vegetable gardens everywhere, and they haven't been there for 2 years. So I think people became a bit relaxed about elephants. And the chili smoke works really well. If the wind supports your idea, I think that is just the main thing. And yeah, so it's very similar to what Kate said. The other problems are with lions, leopards, hyenas, and jackal, of which lions are definitely the bigger problem. And what works for elephants doesn't work for lions in that area. And well, to be honest, I think nobody actually ever tried this chili smoke, so maybe that actually does work. Yeah, that might actually be an idea to try, because there are a lot of them are collared, so they do use a different system there. People are getting warned of the approaching lions that are collared, so that is already that works very well. People know lions are coming and then can put measures into place.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. So Peter, thanks for hanging on. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question?
Yeah, thank you very much again. So my question is to the two presenters. So is there a future in elephant conservation now that we see in most African countries, we have increased developments, especially linear infrastructure? We have power lines coming up, railway systems, a lot of fences. So as in, like, is there a future in this? And also we're seeing that most people they're into, as in land use changes. So how can you relate the two? Thanks.
And I want to step in on Peter's question there as well for you, Kate and Christin, because Peter, that is a fabulous question, really to the point, but also to differentiate between where we are in East Africa and you are in Namibia and Botswana specifically, because you have a very low population, wide open spaces, and your migration of population is predominantly to urban areas. Whereas we in East Africa have a massive population, and there is a lot of movement of this population back to rural areas because there simply aren't the jobs available. So if you can kind of include that in your answer, that would be great.
Yeah, I think that there are two questions perhaps. You know, is there a future of elephant conservation inside national parks, and is there one outside of national parks? And outside of national parks, we really have to embrace corridors in a really large fashion. I really believe that that is the way forward, that we really understand as much as we can about wildlife movement. I say wildlife movement because it's not just elephants migrating. There are other species that need to migrate as well to survive. And as climate change is changing what's happening on the ground, and also changing how national parks, the health of the national parks, basically, we really need to, as humans, look at how can we incorporate wildlife into our human life. Elephants are actually often very good in choosing pathways that are the shortest link between water sources. And often we've actually seen that they manage to use those corridors without people noticing that they've gone through, which is really interesting. So I don't know if I can say yes or no to your answer. I really hope that there is a future for elephants outside of national parks, because we want to sustain a healthy population of elephants, because they are a keystone species. They are so important. They carry so much cultural value as well as ecological value. But there needs to be a shift in how we perceive elephants. If they are being perceived as a pest and as problems only, then probably no. Then we will always be where we are right now, where we're trying to solve conflicts. But so that's why I believe that the concept of conservation needs to be completely owned by each of those countries, and even Africa itself, not just each country for their own, but actually opening corridors across countries. But first of all, we need to understand so much more, and there needs to be a lot of groundwork done with communities as well, and we need to have buy-in of communities. That is the number one thing we have to consider.
Yeah, just adding to that, as Holly pointed out, we do have low human populations, and that has enabled, in the case of Botswana, high wildlife populations, but the conflicts and concerns are the same. As we move forward and development races on, as it will, how do we use our incredible knowledge as a species to ensure that there's a sustainable future, not just for humans, but for wildlife? Because wildlife is integrate to who we are, not just culturally. I think elephants and other wildlife is really, really important culturally, but also just for our well-being and the sustainability of the ecosystems that we rely on as a species. So there is a movement now to acknowledge that, at least, and we need to speed up that knowledge sharing about how urban environments and rural environments can develop in a sustainable way. So we are a global community, and I think it's a global responsibility. You know, in the UK, where I'm originally from, you know, we pretty much got rid of all our large wildlife. We don't have that problem. Yet many people shout about how important it is to sustain elephants and lions, but we need to enable that to happen as a global community. So I think it's very, very challenging. I think we're acknowledging that it's around the corner, and key to that is education. So educating engineers, educating people to be innovative and come up with solutions local to them. And also, and it's been proven time and time again, to educate women, to enable young girls to complete their education. If you have an educated woman, you'll have educated children. And so really enabling countries all over the world to ensure that their young girls are able to complete their education, I think is key to that. And then, yeah, ruralization, we've seen, and we don't have the data on this, but due to the pandemic, many community members lost their job within the tourist industry in Botswana. That's key to the GDP of Botswana. And so we think that many community members have and will continue to move back to rural communities. So the sustainability and the productivity of those communities are key to many community members, because they don't have that external income coming in anymore. Tourism is recovering, thankfully, and hopefully will continue to cover, but that may take some time. So, yeah.
That I really do want to highlight that, you know, educated women mean educated children, and it really is the future. Right, I'm going to pull up our final question here from Zachariah Muteti, and Zachariah, we'll get you to come unmute yourself, but your questions are very well written here, so I'll read them out. And they're, Kate, they are for you. 2 questions. With regard to bulls and elephant individual identification, what short-term identification criteria or technologies would you propose? And I'm guessing, Zachariah, this is because you're thinking of potentially doing a study, and he's got obviously between 3 and 6 months to do this study. And the second part of the question is, have you done any studies in the bull elephant groups that hang around together? How are they related? So that's over to you, Kate.
So yeah, great questions, and thanks for interested in bull ecology. We need more bull elephant biologists. So quickly, unfortunately, whilst there is good AI technology using binary coding for Asian elephants, because they have pink pigmentation on their ears and their nose, so you can use AI quite effectively for Asian elephants. African elephants, as you know, are grey, and so we can't use that very simple AI coding. So it is really at the moment still down to physical differentiation. So we use tears and rips in their ears. And if you've got a small population, depends where you're working, you can get some key individuals fairly well done. Older bulls tend to have more rips and holes on their ears. And younger bulls tend to not have had many run-ins with trees and other elephants to have this wonderful marking. But you can also look at tail hair length, really good indicator. In males, when their penis is erect, then there's often pink pigmentation on there, which can help. Tusks broken, obviously that will change, but tusks broken, chipped, whether they're right or left tusks, so they tend to have a groove at the end of their tusk to indicate that. And it really is spending time sketching and doing that. So there is a great paper by Michelle Henley and her team, Elephants Alive, down in South Africa, about elephant ID. They use a whole complex coding system. We use a simpler, and I wouldn't say better, but I'd love to implement what she's done. And then there's also a recent paper out by Caitlin O'Connell in Namibia, up in Etosha, which I haven't had a chance to read. It came out last week. And I think they use some sort of AI. I'm not sure on what aspects. So to answer that, yes. And then relatedness study, we've tried, but we've got a PhD student starting this year to look at that question. Patrick Choi, I think, looked at that up in Kenya, looking at relatedness within crop raiding individuals. So it's fairly easy to do in that you can collect fresh dung samples and get DNA from that outer layer, but it's obviously expensive. So we got a PhD student to look at that. And that would be really, really fascinating, because bull elephants, are they related? We think that they may leave with a related individual, so a brother, half brother, cousin. And part of my PhD looked at releasing captive elephants, and those two individuals that were released together were much more exploratory. So that makes sense. If you're expanding, you go along with a friend, as someone you spent time with. So that would be really interesting. But whether a father can identify his offspring when it takes 10 to 15 years for that offspring to leave the herd, we don't know. It'd be fascinating, because there is definitely, helping behavior going on. And it's something we'd love to understand better. So,
and just to come in on that, environmental DNA is an incredible resource that one can use. And if you can do any further research on that, and there is definitely a funding available for people to be able to study these things using this, because it is a new way to create baseline studies that show us a hell of a lot more than we are already collecting. So I think that's it on the questions. Emmanuel has sent a wonderful message to say thank you very much for the knowledge shared, and he's from Kenya. And I think everybody, there was someone else further back in the chat who said she really learned a lot. So thank you, Kate and Christin, and thank you everybody else for coming here. And we've really had a variety of students from all over Kenya, and a couple from Nigeria and even further afield. So thank you, everyone.